What if I told you that most of the stories you tell about your life aren't really yours? They were written by others, repeated until they felt like discoveries, and reinforced until they seemed obvious. That's the genius of propaganda. It doesn't aim to just trick you, but to make you feel intelligent for repeating it. The more you repeat, the more it hardens into truth. It doesn't need to waste any energy arguing with you when it can just plant the seeds and let you grow the conclusions yourself, convincing you that the belief was your idea all along. It doesn't need to control your answers, only your questions. I mean, why bother debating when you can decide what the debate is about and on what terms? That's why modern propaganda is nearly invisible. We don't call it propaganda. We call it content and culture. It used to spread ideas, and now it manufactures identities. And the reason it works so well today is painfully simple. We think we're immune. But effective propaganda doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like common sense. So what is it? How do you identify it? And does this knowledge have any practical application in your daily life? Welcome to Psychology Hacks, where I teach you to see and use the hidden mechanisms of human behavior so you can stop being manipulated, confused, and taken advantage of, and instead move through life with clarity, control, and leverage. Propaganda is the use of symbols, repetitive messaging, and selective truth to shape how people think and act without them realizing it. Basically, anytime someone's trying to spread a belief, propaganda is just the way they get that idea out to a wide audience. So it can be the stereotypical war posters, but it can also be content, media, advertisement, music, and even the slang we use without thinking. It's not limited to politics or history either, but is an intrinsic function of the culture around you every day. A common misconception is that propaganda equates to falsehood, but this is incorrect. We hear that word and picture corruption, brainwashing, war posters, and yes, it has been used for all of that, but the word itself is neutral. Everyone uses it because influence always begins by shaping perception and spreading ideas. Governments convince their citizens of a superior national identity, record labels turn an average singer into a star, and even your Tinder date runs a campaign, painting themselves as the noble victim of their last breakup. And while it can be a straight up lie, usually is closer to storytelling, which we all do. We highlight our strengths, downplay our flaws, and tell versions of events that make us look a little bit braver, smarter, or more selfless than we really are. Propaganda just dials that up to the extreme. It organizes it and turns perception management into a system for shaping what people believe on a massive scale. So, how do you do that? First off, framing is everything. The same fact can be made angelic or demonic depending on the context, tone, and symbols used to present it. It's not about true or false, but what's emphasized and what's ignored. Propaganda works best when it ties a leader's vision to archetypal patterns that we all respond to unconsciously, taking selective aspects of an idea and linking them to familiar symbols or images. This forces us to think about the message in the context of that story and that framework. American propaganda, for example, often views freedom through the lens of the entrepreneur or the lone wolf action hero. Counter propaganda might attack that same archetype, highlighting flaws and comparing it to something visceral and repulsive. Disagree with me and you're basically part of a 20th century German political movement. Neither frame is accurate, but accuracy is not the point. The goal was to cast your side as aspirational and the other as reprehensible. Whether you're building a personal brand, your reputation, or just trying to land a date, framing is crucial. You have to figure out the best lens for someone to see you through. So take a lesson from propagandists and start asking, which of my attributes should be highlighted? What symbols capture that vision? And what message creates a myth around me? Look at any influencer, musician, or political campaign. They've locked onto a story, an ideal, and an archetype. And these are normal, ordinary people. They're messy and complicated just like everyone else. But every photo, every post, every soundbite reinforces that one narrow image. They stay in frame every single time and they repeat it over and over until the frame and the perception are hard to separate. And that's the trick. Repetition doesn't just echo the message, it solidifies it. Because repetition creates perceived reality. What you hear most eventually feels truest, regardless of evidence. We're wired with a bias. The more familiar something sounds, the safer it feels. And the safer it feels, the less we question it. That's how ideas slip past the unconscious gatekeeper and settle in the unconscious. Add emotion and urgency and the effect multiplies. Because the dramatic and the recent always feel like the most relevant. So think about a time you got pulled into a group or a movement of some sort. Corporate culture, the military, a political campaign, an online niche. The first time you hear their rally cry and their particular verbiage, it may have sounded strange or even off-putting, but after a few weeks or months inside that group, those same phrases start to feel natural and exciting. That's why it's almost never effective to try convincing someone overnight that their deepest held beliefs are wrong. Unless you can give a pretty shocking contradiction that severely undermines their frame, change has to come gradually. Like water carving a stone, repetition wears us down over time. And the more emotional the message, the deeper it cuts. Now, repetition is powerful, but repeating a phrase with no weight won't get you very far. That's why vivid symbols are essential. They slip past logic and target the unconscious directly. A flag, a uniform, a logo, an archetype, even a color scheme. All of these carry layers of meaning that you don't consciously analyze, but you do respond to. For example, look at the Nike swoosh. It's just a check mark, really, but repeated enough, tied to athletes' victory in the phrase, just do it, that symbol doesn't feel like ink on fabric anymore. It feels like movement, achievement, and even identity. On the other hand, there's the swastika. That's also just a shape, but repeated on armbands, flags, uniforms, and posters, it became much more than that. It communicated power, instilled terror, and demanded obedience. Millions marched, fought, and killed under that symbol. So design isn't just decoration. In the right hands, it's a weapon. So art can be extremely powerful in setting the frame because visuals and music prepare your mind to feel a certain way. They prime you to interpret the experience through a specific lens. That's why political movements obsess over banners, corporations pour millions into branding, and content creators like myself spend hours on logos, fonts, and thumbnails. I hate to admit that because I still freaking suck at them, but I take learning design seriously because it sets the tone before anything's said. And if you guys have any advice for me on that, I'd love to hear it, sincerely. But symbols do the exact same thing. The sight of weapons, for example, signals strength and danger. A badge or a suit might indicate authority. Displays of wealth trigger unconscious associations of competence and success. These cues bypass critical thought and anchor perception instantly on an emotional level. So once the symbol fuses with the story, the message becomes very compelling. It locks perception in place and allows emotion to take over, which is essential because emotion overrides reason. Fear, belonging, outrage, hope. Manipulation usually leverages emotion first. Because if you can make someone feel like something is true, they'll come up with their own reasons to rationalize it, which is way more powerful than telling them what to think because they'll believe they came to this conclusion on their own on the basis of reason. The emotional brain can only think a few seconds ahead, so engaging it undermines your ability to step back and see the bigger picture. Anger overwhelms caution and sympathy, prudence gives way to fear, morality to desire. Everyone from powerful leaders to manipulative teenagers know that emotion is what compels us to act. And influencing emotion isn't necessarily wrong either. A salesman might unethically use fear tactics like, imagine what horrible thing could happen if you don't buy this life insurance product. How would it affect your family to pay for your funeral? Think about it. Let it sink in. Feel the horror. But at the same time, fear could also jolt an apathetic person into making a decision that he genuinely needs to make. And if he doesn't feel any urgency towards action, he procrastinates until you give them a little push, But it's not enough to just pick an emotion and start poking at it till you hit a nerve. Presentation matters. And one powerful frame to set is that of the authority figure. People trust the expert, the celebrity, the confident boss, and even when the authority is staged. Advertisers roll out professional endorsements that are often suspicious at best. Politicians surround themselves with flags and artwork symbolizing state power. Influencers rent studios made to look like luxury apartments. The show of authority can be more persuasive than the authority itself because perception often carries more weight than truth. Nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Every day, we're drawn into subtle but constant battles for our attention. Billions are spent to pull out our focus, to shape what we see and how we think. Propaganda isn't rare. It's basically the air we breathe because we live in a state of constant psychological warfare. And as Sun Tzu said, all warfare is based on deception. I would add that propaganda refines that deception into its own art. And why am I emphasizing deception under the authority category? Well, because the illusion of authority is shockingly easy to manufacture. Working sales jobs taught me quickly how to present myself as an expert when, in reality, I only knew the sales pitch. I always tried to learn the product to become a semi-expert, of course, but that takes time and I need money. But that perception of authority is the difference between being ignored and believed. between someone walking away or buying in. So you have to learn to use it and also to be careful about whose opinion you take to heart. Ask yourself, why is this person an authority? Is it because they're an expert? Well, what does that mean? If you've been paying attention, you've realized by now that credentials don't really guarantee truth. College programs, for example, don't mean too much anymore. We all know those courses are influenced by private interest groups that are intent on spreading propaganda to support their own agenda. For example, most of the people who come to me for coaching figure this out for themselves. They tried therapy and realized it's just not what we've been told. And you've probably also been taken advantage of by marketers who acted like experts, paid actor influencers with no real skills selling you courses and life advice, and even your college girlfriend who swore women understand relationships better, so defer to the expert here when making decisions. Maybe that one's just me. But beyond protecting yourself from fake authority, it's just as important to know how to make others think you have it. Confidence, steady delivery, and even the ability to admit uncertainty, these are nonverbals that convey power, yes, but it's an illusion. Confidence isn't enough. You also have to understand what authority actually is. It's the weight behind your words, regardless of who you are as a person. You may not like a police officer, for example, but you understand that their authority doesn't come from their confidence. It comes from the legal system they represent. So you need to tie your message to something above yourself, or the person just has to challenge you as an individual. But this still only works if the story is simple enough to spread. Controlled narratives always leave things out because they have to. Messages need to be simple enough for the masses to digest. So issues collapse into things like, this is the villain, this is the hero, and nuance dies because the story outweighs the substance. The problem is that life is rarely black and white. Some things are, but usually not the ones people tell you. Male and female, for example, is about as black and white as it gets. Yet the left has managed to throw that into question through the use of propaganda. Now I live in a dystopian society where someone can look me dead in the eye and insist that men can get pregnant. And if I disagree, it must be because I'm basically a certain former art school dropout. There's no other reason. There's no other conceivable possible explanation for why I would disagree with that statement. And then there's the other side of the coin. The idea that genocide is wrong should be about as straightforward as it gets. But again, through persistent propaganda, many on the political right have come to support it. Not because they love violence, but because the victims have been branded as the bad guys. The people being slaughtered are the terrorists. And once you buy into that frame, almost anything can be justified. Listen, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Only God is good. And even when we think we're doing good, we're often blind to our own hidden motives. And when a battle cry gets oversimplified into something that narrow, perspective dies. The ends start justifying impure means, and the other side's complexity gets erased. Many of the supposedly good things that we do aren't really as selfless as we'd like to pretend. Stories of right and wrong in general have more nuance than can be communicated through memes. But we like memes because processing the complexity of real life takes too much work. So we actually prefer the oversimplification, and that's a weakness that is constantly exploited. But the reason good versus evil is so seductive is because it's hardwired into the human base level programming. The oldest stories that we still tell today lean on that dichotomy. We all want to see ourselves as good, and we're quick to cast our enemies as completely evil. But pause and ask yourself, why? Why do you see them that way? Who told you that story? What agenda shaped the details that were highlighted and which were left out? This applies on a marketing and social level as well, by the way. And remember, once the story is in place, it's much easier to just go along with popular opinion. Quote here from the subject matter expert, Edward Bernays: "No serious sociologist any longer believes that the voice of the people expresses any divine or especially wise and lofty idea. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people. And that mind is made up for it by the group leaders in whom it believes and by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion. Like it or not, we are social creatures. Even rebellious contrarians like myself, who may or may not have a mild form of Asperger's, are not immune to the pull of group pressure, although we would like to think that we are. We might think harder about which groups we join, but we can't escape from the fact that we are part of an ecosystem. That's why in propaganda, once you create the impression that most people agree on something, it becomes self-reinforcing. People start policing themselves so they don't stand out. They go along with the narrative and eventually convince themselves there must be something to it because, after all, everyone else thinks so. What makes this even harder to resist is the way social media platforms and algorithms now work. People literally see what they want to see constantly. Instead of being exposed to a wide range of information, their feeds are narrowed to the propaganda they already prefer. So take a girl going through a breakup, for example. At first, she finds comfort in the posts from other women sharing their struggles, feels supportive and like a community, but soon her mind is filled with nothing else. Her focus magnifies the pain, the emotional intensity rises, and she becomes more receptive to content that feeds her indignation. Now she's just listening to women vent about how much they hate men, which is understandable, but propaganda highlights the worst qualities of trashy boyfriends and ties them not to her bad choices, but to men in general. It becomes us versus them, good versus evil. Meanwhile, a guy in the same situation is on the other side of the algorithm. He's consuming content about how women only care about material things, about how they're hypergamous and can't love you without being manipulated. The algorithm keeps feeding him proof of this and reinforcing it with evidence and case studies and making it feel like this is what everyone's saying. Add this to the emotional charge and the sense of indignation that he has had through past experience and being hurt and taken advantage of, and it starts to feel very real. What's the end result? A fractured society, broken family systems, tension between men and women intensified. Now, take a step back and look at the social media and dating world through what we've learned today so far. That kind of content hijacks your brain on purpose. The people on these shows are often paid actors, or at the very least, propped up by a system with an agenda you're not supposed to notice. I only pick up on it because this is what I do all day. But even if that sounds too conspiratorial for you, at a minimum, the content is engineered to do what? Trigger emotion, because emotion means attention, and attention can be monetized, which means they're literally profiting from your pain. I'm sure that doesn't give anyone incentive to intentionally create a more divisive cultural landscape. That would be crazy. Of course, there couldn't possibly be a larger plan to divide and conquer our society. No way. It's not like bot farms exist or they create the illusion of public support or opposition. It's not like these tactics have been used to shape elections. And I'm sure the worldview you've built through endless scrolling isn't biased, isn't laced with propaganda or anything of that sort at all. That would be crazy. A foreign nation would never also seek to weaken us by starting a civil war. That would be insane. Civil wars don't happen here. It's tough to undo this kind of programming. I can't convince a woman from my gym that if we're going to date, that she can't keep acting single. I can't convince my sister that she's not my brother. And I can't convince my friend that love doesn't work like it does in the movies. Why? Because you're not arguing with reason. You're arguing against programming, bias, and a lifetime of propaganda. And once you learn to spot propaganda, you see it everywhere, which begs the question, who's behind it? Who wants me to think this way and why? And I'm not saying it's one person, it's companies, it's nations, it's individuals, but whoever owns the microphone, the playlist, the algorithm, or the newsfeed controls the conversation. So why was that particular story covered on the news? Things happen every single day. Why spotlight this one? What agenda does it serve? Why do media outlets all cover the same story but with polar opposite takes? Why focus on the Middle East and not South America, on Eastern Europe and not Western Asia? Why are certain people and stories elevated while others are ignored? Because I'll tell you this much, it's not for your personal benefit. I'm not telling you this so you can get weird and paranoid about what the government's doing, but so that you can learn to stop taking things at face value. That would be a great skill for you to take away from this episode, because people are going to try and program you constantly, and you have to develop a strong situational awareness to keep from being taken advantage of. Now, again, the tools are neutral. They've obviously been used for, dare I say, evil, but that's not their only use. Nations have to find a way to unify. Businesses need strong public relations. You have to manage your reputation. You might be thinking, this is interesting and you've given me some practical tips, but why harp so much on the vaguely conspiratorial big picture angle? Here's why. The things you want and the stories you believe about how to get them are doctored. You can spend your whole life chasing ideals of career, relationships, spirituality, or mental health that were sold to you by people looking to profit. Oh, don't worry, I've got a life coach. I'm a new age spiritualist. I go to therapy. I've got a modern view of relationships and I've opened my third eye. So now I finally left all the propaganda behind to become awakened. Right. No, guys, propaganda sets the frameworks, the symbols, the stories you use to interpret reality. It hacks your brain to influence thought before you even realize it's happening. And while you're busy defending your opinions, the real battles have already been fought and won because they've decided the categories you think inside of, forcing a decision while making it seem like you chose of your own free will. It's the magician's card trick. And chasing goals that I truly believed were my ideas that were not have caused me tremendous pain. But that's the mark of propaganda. It doesn't just sell you lies, it sells you yourself. It hands you an identity, a mission, and even a sense of purpose and convinces you that it was yours all along. That's why you can't afford to ignore it because you can easily waste your life playing someone else's game. Imagine how different your life could look if you weren't programmed like the masses, but like the people that were born into generational wealth, power, and influence. If you could see through the stories being sold by media and marketers, if you could not only defend yourself against the billion-dollar campaigns, but also use those same tools to create power and agency for yourself. I appreciate your time and attention. Be sure to follow for more. I will see you soon.